coffee, tea, wine, juice, water, everything. Even cigarettes that I don't smoke, everything's there, ready for any scenario. Yeah. Should we start? Should we kick it off? Yeah. So, hi everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Davor Orlic. I am the Chief Operations Officer at IRCAI, and I will be your MC for today. Today is not about IRCAI, as you can imagine, but about our colleague Adriana-Eufrosina Bora, who's with us, and her colleagues. The program is made out of 3 parts. First, we will hear from our director, John Shaw-Taylor. Then we have Her Excellency, the Ambassador, Simona Mirela Miculescu from the Permanent Delegation of Romania to UNESCO. Then we'll have Pratik Sibal, a specialist from UNESCO, a colleague. Then we'll have a short intervention by Claire Healy, a research officer at the UNODC. And after that, we will introduce Adriana and move to our panel with our colleagues, Yolanda, Catherine, Lauren, and Alison. And we also have a colleague from Mila who can answer technical questions as well. Let's begin by having a welcome video by John. He's traveling and cannot be with us now due to bad connectivity, but fortunately we managed to snatch a short video beforehand, so here we go.
Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, my sincere thanks for your attendance at this event and your interest in the development of IRCAI and its award program. In 2021, IRCAI launched the AI Award for individuals who have dedicated their work to solving problems related to the Sustainable Development Goals through the application of artificial intelligence. We strongly encourage nominations from around the world, with particular emphasis on Africa, the Arab states, Asia and the Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean UNESCO regions. We also strongly encourage nominations from all backgrounds: research, academia, industry, policy, civil society, and so on, as IRCAI is committed to promoting equal opportunities and believe this should be applied regardless of their age, sex, race, ethnic origin, disability, sexual orientation, or religious beliefs. We are proud to announce that this year's awardee is Adriana-Eufrosina Bora, PhD candidate at the Centre for Data Science in the School of Mathematical Sciences at Queensland University of Technology in Australia, awarded for her work on the project AIMS, which stands for Artificial Intelligence Against Modern Slavery. This project uses AI to read and benchmark companies' statements produced under mandatory reporting requirements in order to improve transparency and help eradicate modern slavery. By making this award, we recognize Adriana for her contribution towards the Sustainable Development Goals. She has our full support in presenting her work on the international stage to create more awareness about the crime of modern slavery and how technologies such as AI can help to eradicate it once and for all. I will finish by making a call for those who are interested to join our network initiative from different organizations, from our closest collaborator, UNESCO, the African Union, the European Commission, and other partners, but also individuals and research groups who would like to join our global partnership to work together towards tackling such ambitious goals as the one presented today. Thank you for your time.
Ms. Ambassador, if you want to go ahead.
Of course. Bonjour de Paris. I warmly greet all participants in this event organized by such a dynamic UNESCO category institute as the International Research on Center on Artificial Intelligence. The fact is that I'm really glad to join you because especially, and I'm honest here, it is about granting your 2021 annual award to a brilliant young Romanian lady. So congratulations, dear Adriana-Eufrosina Bora. Calde felicitări, draga noastră. I couldn't be prouder of your impressive career and achievements. And I'll take a screenshot with you and me. I have to say that I'm also touched by the topic of the research with which you won. Artificial intelligence against modern slavery in the context of human trafficking, most often children and women, as we know, is of great importance in achieving the Sustainable Development Goal 8. And you might like to know that Romania was part of the 33 countries who actually, during 18 months, negotiated and identified the SDGs when I was an ambassador in New York to the UN. But also because, as Pope Francis used to say, human trafficking is an open wound on the body of contemporary society, and it is a crime against humanity. I also welcome the fact that the winner is not only Romanian, which of course enchants me, but a young lady. We care a lot here at UNESCO and also in Romania about the role of girls and women in STEM, whose role in our world is ever bigger and ever greater. The artificial intelligence used to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals is an example, an excellent example that I warmly welcome. We all know by now that the artificial intelligence is, in the service of humanity is paramount. And I'm glad that I experienced a historic moment in this area last November here at UNESCO, when the member states, the 193 member states, unanimously adopted at the General Conference a recommendation on ethics in artificial intelligence, which is actually the first global instrument of this sort. All I can hope, especially these days when the tragedy of war is haunting our continent after more than 70 years of peace, is that Amit Ray, pioneer of compassionate AI movement, was right when he said, the coming era of artificial intelligence will not be the era of war, but the era of deep compassion, nonviolence, and love. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pratik,
Thank
you
you.
will have
Thank
the
you.
next intervention.
Thank you, Davor, and thank you, Ambassador, for your words. It's really encouraging to hear senior leaders like yourself encouraging innovation and how we are working towards SDG at UNESCO. And congratulations, Adriana, for this great project on fighting modern slavery. It's really an impressive collection of solutions that IRCAI has identified through its top 100 call. And these solutions really serve some of the niche needs of communities, whether it's supporting governments to increase their responsiveness to public needs, as we saw in one of the examples from Italy, or supporting agriculture through monitoring of agricultural production and providing information through strengthening access to information for farmers and policymakers in East Africa. There's a wide variety of solutions that have been identified which are leveraging AI. And at UNESCO, we have a role to play in fostering innovation and free flow of ideas. So the International Research Center on AI in Slovenia, as a Category 2 center under the auspices of UNESCO, is playing this catalytic role in spurring innovation by facilitating this exchange of ideas, and is also not stopping there. It's also providing support which is tailored, whether it's access to networks or technical expertise or business mentorship to different solutions, or as John likes to call them, proof of concept systems. So we believe that this is important work, and there is a need to ensure that AI-based innovation is human rights-based, ethical, and context-sensitive. And as Ambassador from Romania just pointed out, UNESCO adopted the recommendation on the ethics of AI just in November. And one of the goals that going forward we have is to embed human rights and ethical concerns in the development of technologies. So I'm also very happy to share with you all that the next edition of IRCAI Top 100 will actually be a partnership between UNESCO and IRCAI, where we are currently developing an AI innovation framework for SDGs, which will first help us identify holistic solutions that address societal problems. Secondly, mainstream human rights and ethical concerns in the development and use of emerging technologies. So we are already moving from the direction of identifying principles, which our member states have worked very painstakingly through the past 2 years to identify, to translating that into actual solutions. And thirdly, of course, we'll be building a community of practice and knowledge bank around these innovative ideas. In closing, I would like to say, as we enter the decade of action, there are two objectives that we are seeing. First, catalyzing the development of digital public goods to develop standards and infrastructure that can serve innovation. And we've seen this working with IRCAI, for instance, for the recommendation on open educational resources, that there is a lot of value in creating digital public goods. Second, in ensuring inclusive innovation. In this regard, we need to be cautious of techno-solutionism, where we all are looking for nails because we just have hammers in our hands. So it's really impressive to see the solutions that have been identified, which are inclusive, and the process to identify them has been inclusive and consultative as well. In the end, I would just conclude that our tagline is really no innovation for us without us, when we are talking about different communities and the solutions being developed for them. Thank you. Looking forward to the discussion going on.
Claire, you there? Claire had some technical issues, but hopefully she's back now. Okay, so maybe we skip Claire for now and we come back to her speech later on. Well, I'd like to say that it's amazing to see what's possible when someone combines passion with ingenuity and a bit of research curiosity. And this year's IRCAI's award winner, Adriana, has managed to do that perfectly, I'd say. So I'm excited to be able to introduce Adriana on IRCAI's behalf and to engage in this project later on in the IRCAI panel. However, before that, we have Professor Kerry Morgenstein, who is Adriana's supervisor. And given that now it's almost midnight or 1 o'clock in Australia, she has given us a video kindly, and maybe we can play that and then see if Claire can come back.
On behalf of the Queensland University of Technology Centre for Data Science, it's my great pleasure to congratulate Adriana for this prestigious award from IRCAI, the International Research Centre on Artificial Intelligence. We support Adriana's efforts to bring the power of data science, which includes statistics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, to address the global challenge of modern slavery. Data science can bring a wide range of new tools and unprecedented scale to this insidious problem. The Centre for Data Science endorses this effort by taking Adriana's excellent work to date to the next level. Through her PhD, Adriana will focus on developing AI tools and processes that will enable inspection of many thousands of documents to help decision makers identify whether and how businesses are cooperating with respect to their obligations to report on modern slavery. Importantly, the research will offer a unique opportunity to highlight exemplary business practices. It will also provide a rigorous, peer-reviewed framework on which to build solid, reputable practice and policy. It will seed other research directions, expand networks, and bring communities of research and practice closer together. It's a pleasure to host this research in the Centre for Data Science at QUT. Our centre embraces a diversity of interests and expertise in AI and its applications, and it's deeply committed to data science for social good. The outputs of this project will also benefit Australia's businesses and our government. Congratulations, Adriana. You're an inspiration to us all.
Fantastic. Super. Claire, should we try with you? You want to give it a shot? I don't think we hear you. No.
Try it without the headphones.
Oh, now we do. Now it's happening.
Ah, okay. Thought it'd be better with the headphones. Apologies for the technical problems. And it is difficult to come after such an enthusiastic endorsement, but I think from UNODC's side, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, we can only second what's been said already. In the crime research section of UNODC, we work on the Global Report on Trafficking in Persons. And we also conduct all kinds of research in order to go beyond what's detected by the authorities and try to understand, how trafficking plays out in the real world. In the last global report on trafficking in persons, we had a special chapter on trafficking and the internet and internet-based technologies. And, there's often a focus on how traffickers, exploiters, abusers can use the internet, use new ICT technologies to, exploit more people. What we found in the research was that when trafficking is based online, there can be more victims. This is, of course, really of concern. However, what this award and this project presents is the flip side of that coin. So where we can actually harness what, the newest developments in ICT, and then specifically also in artificial intelligence, in order to boost our response, in order to access the data and information we need. And I think, learning more about Adriana's project, it's really an example of how we can turn that around, how we can use the new technologies available to us, for those of us who understand them, of which I don't think I am, unfortunately, one, but Adriana surely is, to really improve our efforts to prevent the crime of trafficking in persons. So it's absolutely welcome. We are, I think, struggling to catch up always in our data collection and our research and our responses to the potential of what can be done with technology and with artificial intelligence. So huge congratulations to Adriana, and looking forward to continuing to hear more about the project and continuing to hopefully work together in the future. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claire. I think we've reached the point of the event where the awardee has to speak. So Adriana, we have time, so just enjoy yourself.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and greetings from Australia. I am truly honored and excited to be awarded the IRCAI AI Award 2021 for the work on AI against modern slavery, which is encompassed in our project aims. First and foremost, I would really like to thank Yolanda and the Future Society for the nomination for this award and for your continuous mentorship and support. Thank you also, Catherine and Lorraine from Walk3 and WikiRate for your endorsement in the application process, but also throughout this entire project. Without the support of your organizations, project aims as we know it today would have not been possible. What is more, I would like to thank Queensland University of Technology and Mila for joining us and supporting us in taking this project forward together. Finally, thank you, IRCAI, team, experts, and network for investing your trust in selecting me as the award winner of your first edition. I received this award at a very important time in the project development, but also in my career. This award is a reassurance that more people are starting to pay attention to the crime of modern slavery, which exploits the most vulnerable. It is also a timely reinforcement that the work undertaken so far, it is going in the right direction, which motivates me even more to keep pursuing this road less traveled. So today, I'm going to use the stage that I've been given. So for the next maybe 10 minutes, I would like to hopefully create a bit more awareness about the crime of modern slavery, how we can work towards eradicating it, and how maybe cutting-edge technology such as AI can assist us in this journey. As we know, there are many applications of AI for social good. So where does the fight against modern slavery fit into the Sustainable Development Agenda? Well, it is under the SDG 8, Target 8.7, which calls, and I quote here, to take immediate and effective measures to eradicate forced labor and modern slavery and human trafficking, and secure the prohibition and elimination of the worst form of child labor, including recruitment and use of child soldier, and by 2025, end child labor in all its forms. We are already deep into 2022. So under such an urgent deadline, we need to understand how does modern slavery look today? How can stakeholders accelerate their work towards eradicating it? And what are the opportunities of using AI and other cutting-edge technology to assist in this journey? So let's start by trying to understand what is modern slavery. And if you haven't heard about the term modern slavery, you probably heard about human trafficking. While widely more recognized, the term human trafficking is considered as a subset of the modern slavery phenomenon. The term modern slavery is used to describe a situation where coercion, threats, or deceptions are used to exploit victims and undermine or deprive them of their freedom. Modern slavery is referred to as an umbrella term that encompasses, and I quote, any situation of exploitation that a person cannot refuse or leave because of threats, violence, coercion, deception, and abuse of power. So a few instances such as these ones are human trafficking, forced labor, bonded labor, debt bondage, domestic servitude, descendant-based slavery, forced child labor, unlawful recruitment and use of child soldier, forced and early marriages, slavery-like practices, organ harvesting, and more. So what causes modern slavery? Modern slavery, it is the exploitation of the most vulnerable. It thrives on the exploitation of those in need of protection, putting children, migrants, and refugees at the top of the ones most likely to become victims. Slavery flourishes where there is poverty, discrimination against marginalized groups, a weak rule of law, or instability brought by war, conflict, natural disasters, just to name a few causes. Without the right safety measures in place, vulnerable people who are looking for stability and safety fall prey to perpetrators and their false offers. So when the epidemic of modern slavery meets a global pandemic, unprecedented natural disaster, and unimaginable wars, the need to discuss and address this issue and protect those that are most vulnerable could not be more urgent. And thus, an event such as this one today, it is most welcome. So what is the scale of modern slavery? Well, measuring modern slavery, it is not an easy task, as it is a hidden crime. But Walk Free Foundation and the International Labour Organization have been publishing estimates under the Global Slavery Index. In the latest edition, they estimate that approximately 40.3 million people are enslaved in the world, 1 in 4 being a child, with women and girls disproportionately affected. The results also show us that modern slavery is not a phenomenon that happens over there, but it happens almost in every country in the world. And also, out of the 40.3 million people enslaved, 60 million are estimated to be in forced labor in the private sector, feeding directly into the supply chain of big corporations, ending up in the products and services that ordinary people are consuming every day, connecting all of us to this crime. Modern slavery continues to proliferate due to lack of market pressure and regulations. This crime is estimated to be the 3rd largest crime in the world, and now it is cheaper than ever to trade in human beings. And to quote Kevin Bales, who have done most of this research, He says that people do not enslave people to be mean to them. They are doing it for a profit. So what are governments and businesses doing? Well, governments, but also consumers and society as a whole are becoming more concerned about the issue of modern slavery and the link with the supply chains. Well, for businesses, identifying modern slavery in supply chain is not only increasing a company's credibility with the environmental, social, corporate governance, the ESG compliance, but it also ensures that a business cannot incur vast fines or lose investment or lose consumer trust or even face legal action. The ethical nature of addressing modern slavery should alone motivate businesses to take action. Nevertheless, it has been proven that self-regulation is failing, so government stepped in. A very promising initiative in this sense was the introduction of the Modern Slavery Act in the UK in 2015. And we have now also a Modern Slavery Act in Australia since 2018. And those legislation are requiring big corporations to publish one statement per year where they describe the structure of their supply chain and operation, and they explain the steps they are taking to ensure that slavery doesn't happen. Other countries and jurisdictions are now quickly following suit with their own modern slavery targeted legislation or larger due diligence legislation, such as in Canada, New Zealand, the Netherlands, Germany, or the entire European Union. So now that we have those legislation, or we're expecting a few more to follow, documenting the impact of new legislative acts is an indispensable tool for improving the effectiveness of this legislation and advancing business practices. So a great initiative to try to start this started in 2016 when WalkFree and WikiRate partnered to start analyzing the statements under the UK Modern Slavery Act. This process is done manually, and it takes approximately 1 hour per statement to be fully analyzed. So over the last six years, there were approximately 2,500 statements analyzed. And this process, it is done, as I said, manually, and it's very time consuming. However, it is the most comprehensive study that we have today. Yet we know that in the UK alone, we have an approximation of 16,000 statements expected to be published each year. And we have 1,000 more coming from the other legislation. So each year we're leaving thousands of statements unanalyzed, and governments are unable to assess the actual level of compliance. So while the publication of corporate statements has offered a great capacity to external entities to hold companies to account and really celebrate also the good practices of companies that are doing well, it has presented new challenges. Most external parties, such as NGOs or the government agencies, do not have all the capacities to do this analysis comprehensively. Thus, automating the process is the only way to achieve accountability at scale. And this is where Project AIMS entered the scene, filling this gap by creating the first scalable open source experiments that are using AI to try to analyze the statements. Project AIMS is responding to a real need to create effective monitoring and analysis of the modern slavery reporting at scale. Project AIMS is an innovative way to hold businesses to account and celebrate good practices, and therefore contributing to the SDG agenda. This project will speed up the process of analyzing the statement, which means that those external parties, the team of the NGOs and the analysts from the government, will now use this time to do more cognitively interesting tasks and go deeper into this research. Going forward, this would really lead to better disclosure and to better due diligence to tackle modern slavery in the global supply chains. Project AIMS seeks to capture the potential of artificial intelligence to help solve pressing social issues in new ways and truly uphold human dignity. The goal is twofold: to empower civic society and legislators to hold businesses and governments to account, and also to pave the way for new type of public policy and legislation which embraces the full power of cutting-edge technology such as AI. We have three main objectives in Project AIM. One, it is to build the open source tool, which will decrease the time it takes to analyze the statements. Second, it is to provide policymakers and legislators with a greater understanding of these new methods that then they can foster in applying for other similar legislation or larger in scope legislations such as the due diligence one, and also encourage top AI, software development, data, and social scientist experts to apply their domain expertise in the fight for the Sustainable Development Agenda and hopefully in the fight in combating modern slavery. And this truly brings me to my final remarks. We are proud to say that Project X is now open source and is available on GitHub, and that we have captured the attention of top scientists in AI, data science, and more, and also the institutions from across the globe. So while this wonderful award and this wonderful accolade, it is offered at an individual level, the story of Project AIMS, it is a story of collective success. So I truly invite you to access our open source GitHub, read about the story of the project, and also read about all the wonderful contributors that stepped in at different stages in this journey and make Project AIM a success as we know it today. I am extremely grateful for all the support I received throughout this journey, convincing some of the greatest minds from across the globe to believe in this project and to give some of their time in the fight against modern slavery. It is truly one of my proudest achievements. So I look forward to hearing from some of them today in the roundtable discussion that is going to follow suit. Please stay in touch, and I look forward to answer all your questions. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much, Adriana. Yeah, we're all clapping. Yeah. Fantastic. I mean, the way we designed this event was also to sort of have you, giving your speech, but also then going for the nitty-gritty of the project itself to try to understand, what are the next steps, what's happening. You can join us for the panel, absolutely. You're more than welcome. I'm sure that the audience, if anyone has questions, drop them in the chat or drop them in the Q&A. We're going to come back to them at the end of the panel. The idea is that we have 4 colleagues, Yolanda, Catherine, Lauren, and Alison, from the main, basically from the core partners of the project throughout the past couple of years, and probably the next chapter of the project. So hi, everyone. So at IRCAI, as a research center in AI, focused a bit on sustainable development, we're interested in how do we measure, SDGs with data and so on, so that there can be built trust back towards researchers, consumers, investors and whatnot, and even governments themselves. So we're trying to look at that landscape, and this project is basically the perfect example for SDG 8, and specifically for 8.7 that deals with that. So it's a very nice showcase. So for a start, I have 3 questions on my side. I would kindly ask you to briefly introduce yourself, your organization, your role in the project throughout its timeline, and why this work is important for you, and what do you want to Project AIMS to basically achieve, right? So perhaps we start with Catherine. You go first, and then Yolanda, Lauren, and Alison, if that's okay.
Of course, no, very happy to go first. And first of all, just a huge congratulations to Adriana on the receipt of this award. We're incredibly proud of you at Walk Free and have been very pleased to play a part in Project AIMS. So congratulations. And thanks also to IRCAI for pulling this session together and also having us along to talk about Project AIMS. So my name is Catherine Bryant. I'm Head of Policy and Programmes at Walk Free. Walk Free, for those of you who might not be familiar, is an international human rights organisation which is focused on accelerating the eradication of modern slavery. We've been working on both research and engaging and advocacy around modern slavery since about 2012. So this is our 10-year anniversary this year. And we're probably most well known for, as Adriana said in her opening remarks, the Global Slavery Index, which we first put out in 2013. And since 2017, we've been really proud to partner with the International Labour Organization, the International Organization for Migration, on the global estimates of modern slavery, which is where that 40.3 million figure that Adriana mentioned in her opening remarks comes from. So through our research at Walk Free, we also do engagement with businesses, with governments, with faith, investors, as well as civil society and survivor groups, to really accelerate the eradication of modern slavery, and basing this on groundbreaking evidence and research. So that's the context in where Project AIMS was based. It's very much starting to develop that research. And I was really really pleased to meet Adriana. I think it was back in 2018 when she came in and interned for a little bit at Walk Free. And as she mentioned, by 2018, me and Lorraine had been looking at Modern Slavery Act statements for about 2 years by this point, had a very unhealthy obsession with how we can actually improve the assessment of the statements being produced under just the UK Modern Slavery Act at that point in time. And as Adriana explained, it's I think 16,000 statements per year under the UK legislation alone. We're really pleased to partner with universities all around the world to assess those statements, to do peer review, but it is a very time-intensive, very resource-intensive task. And so I met Adriana for coffee, I think in 2019, and she just said, "Oh, I've got the answer." And I was like, "Amazing, fantastic." So we're really, really pleased to kind of support this. And she says, "I've been working on this algorithm and I think I can make this a lot quicker for you and a lot easier for you." So we were really, really excited, and then came on board with both with Walk Free, with WikiRate, the Future Society, and obviously working directly with Adriana on developing this algorithm over the last year or so. I think the work is important for us. Obviously, it's fundamental to the eradication of modern slavery. It's also looking at how we can really leverage business in this fight, and making sure that they're taking this issue seriously as well. So there's also an element of holding businesses to account with this project, making sure that the statements are actually being unlocked, that information is being unlocked for different audiences to actually hold businesses to account. And I'll just finish by saying that what we see in the future, kind of what's ultimately going to be achieved by this is, when we first started doing this project, it was just the UK that had this legislation at the national level. There was legislation in California, but only at the state level. We now have the Australian Modern Slavery Act. We have human rights due diligence coming on board across various countries in the EU. So I think the opportunities for this project going forward is huge. I think there's always going to be a difficult task of actually scaling it down and focusing on the one thing that you want to focus on. So I think there's a real opportunity here to really unlock the information that companies are disclosing on modern slavery and human rights more broadly. But there'll be more on that, so I'll stop there and then pass over to Lorraine.
Thank you, Kat.
Hi, yes, so thank you so much, Adriana. Amazing work, and so happy to be here today to celebrate you and everything that you've done for this project. So yeah, as you, Adriana and Catherine have already told you a little bit, but just to say, so I'm Lorraine, I'm the managing director at WikiRate, and WikiRate is an open data platform that collects data about companies, specifically looking at their social and environmental performance, as well as their governance data. So their ESG data is what we collect and aggregate. And what makes us different in the space, because I'm sure you know there's lots of aggregators out there, is that we make this data available for free to anyone, because we believe that if we all better understand the impacts of companies, we can all take better decisions on how they should be impacting people and planet. So Project AIMS has been a fantastic collaboration for us, not alone because the people we've been working with have been so pleasant to work with, and the project's goal has been such a good one to fight for. We've really enjoyed it because it is kind of a new frontier within what is possible. So WikiRate collects data in as much as we can automated ways, but a lot of this really good information that is out there about companies is in sources that are hard to process for machines. And so you need to develop bespoke algorithms to process those documents. And so starting to do that with a project that was from the get-go focused on making that open source was incredibly powerful for us, because we don't work just on modern slavery. So for modern slavery, and just under these couple legislations, there's thousands of documents coming out. We're working across the full ESG spectrum, and so looking at all of the SDGs. And so you can imagine how many documents and how many types of information we're trying to process. So yes, we are a wiki that allows us to crowdsource the engagement in collecting that information. So yes, we work with lots of university groups, we work with volunteers who help us to do that kind of systematic assessment, but ultimately we cannot get to the scale we have to unless we start to involve these kinds of automation tools. And so that's why this project has been such an exciting one for us. And yeah, we're really grateful to see where we've come to today and looking forward to what is next on the horizon. So I'll leave it at that because I know we have lots more interesting stuff to discuss. I believe Yolanda was next.
Thank you all, and hello from Istanbul. It's great to see you and see an even broader community now regarding this project, and thank you, IRCAI. The Future Society, I'm head of research at the Future Society. The Future Society is a nonprofit originally incubated at Harvard Kennedy School of Government with a mission to advance the responsible adoption of AI and emerging technologies for the benefit of humanity. When Adriana joined us, she was previously a policy researcher and project manager. With our colleague Nicholas Miaye, president of the Future Society, we were pleased and enthusiastic to help take forward and under our wing the project that she began in her master's degree at Sciences Po Paris, which is applying natural language processing to speed up analysis of the modern slavery statements. And we were fortunate to find the partners to make that a reality. And that's everyone on this panel. From Walk Free at Mindaru Foundation, WikiRay, also Business Human Rights Resource Center, Mila, data scientists around the world have gathered in hackathons and other activities. So it's really great, and it's now open source. So this community is a huge achievement. Our goals are obviously to leverage our network and expertise in AI policy to first help this community, and second, advance the application of AI for sustainable development goals, including this very important use case of modern slavery, which is the area that has consensus and is even more and more pressing, including the war situation referenced earlier in Ukraine. And it should be noted, as mentioned, that such a tool could be used for broader ESG reporting and non-financial data disclosure reporting. So the natural language processing and this particular AI tool could be used for broader sustainable development goals. There are also other types of AI solutions that could potentially help modern slavery as well. We can think about analysis of satellite or aerial images, for example. So there's a lot to do, and it's great to keep this conversation going. And now that Adriana is taking it forward at Queensland University of Technology and with the support of Mila and others, we're really happy to see this community take it forward. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm going next. Is that right? Awesome. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, IRCAI and Adriana. Congratulations again. This is such an exciting award and such important recognition for work that really needs to be done and is going to have a very significant impact. So my name is Alison Cohen. I work with Mila as the Applied AI Projects Lead within our AI for Humanity department. My background is actually in international development, and I have a master's in global affairs. And the work that I'm doing currently is managing a portfolio of AI for social good projects with the goal of achieving meaningful social change through the development and deployment of responsible AI tools. Mila itself is actually the world's largest academic research center in machine learning. But it has a mandate that's even broader than that. We seek to contribute to the broader community in facilitating the uptake of artificial intelligence more broadly, both in the private and public sector. Within Mila, we have a technical transfer team that builds industry-grade proof of concepts for AI products. And it was that team that was able to do a project evaluation on the technical feasibility of Project AIMS, assessing things like data extraction, annotation, and the algorithms themselves. And our goal now is to continue working with Adriana to build upon these findings and to continue developing the tool into what we hope will be a robust accountability solution to address the challenge of modern slavery. And we're really doing this by integrating project aims into the AI for Humanity portfolio at MILA. I think this work is important because it showcases how AI can be used to achieve meaningful social change. In this context, to increase the transparency of supply chains and improve the accountability of big business. What's also important to remember, and as Yolanda said, natural language processing, which is the algorithm on which this project rests, it's still in its relatively early stages of development. There's lots of potential from an AI research and development perspective, which gives it such immense potential for impact in the realm of qualitative data analysis. So this very novel and interesting technology can be transferred into other contexts with the goal of monitoring and evaluation. And so in terms of our next steps, we're really looking forward to connecting with policymakers to figure out how these tools can become as impactful as possible. We're also looking forward to connecting both with corporations and potentially auditing bodies who are serious about their ESG commitments. And if there are companies or public sector organizations interested in becoming involved and want to support this work, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. I think we almost answered the question that I had as a second one, which was, the project, if you have me understand correctly, is coming from this NGO space. And it's connected with academia, and now the third component is missing, which is the implementation. So in this data science space, you would always have to have, a proof of concept or a working prototype or, an application or whatever it is that it literally is, software and can give feedback back to users. So I would assume, Alison, that you now just said that, more research is ahead. But what about how does the project actually becomes more than just a project and literally interacts with businesses and gets implemented, and not just businesses, I mean any stakeholder in general?
That's a great question. Yeah, so like you said, our goal is to take this into a proof of concept and then deploy it at scale to make it as impactful as we know that it can be. But there are a number of questions that we have both on the political and on the technical side that need to be answered before we can industrialize this solution. On the political side, I think we need to be asking ourselves questions around challenges that businesses themselves have in disclosing some information, and being able to make sure that we don't get noise. We want to create an AI tool that is as accurate as possible and therefore reflects our understanding of how businesses are sharing this information. We also want to answer questions around how policymakers can adapt their guidelines to facilitate the application of machine learning. For example, as we've all talked about, sort of making sure that companies are publishing these reports in ways that are machine readable. We also want to figure out how we should be integrating with government's existing reporting registries. And then on the technical side, what are the best tools for data extraction? How can we improve things like the data labeling process? And what algorithms will be most effective at capturing some of the key metrics that this project has identified? Another overarching element that's important to answer is, what does it mean to meaningfully engage survivors in this space as well? These are all things that we're looking forward to working towards and to begin answering. And then when it comes to how we plan on engaging end users, I think we're going to begin by starting with both the Australian and UK governments, both of which already have Modern Slavery Acts in place. And we really want to demonstrate to them what this tool can do, and hopefully through that generate more interest in governments internationally in the utility of tools like this. And we also hope to connect with local stakeholders working both within Australia and the UK who are interested in monitoring ESG performance for eventual ownership and deployment of this tool long term. I think I'll leave it at that.
Maybe if I may, I can just add a little bit in terms of what it also means. So when this law came into being in 2015, it wasn't expected that there was going to be an algorithm processing these documents, right? And still today, I believe that lots of companies are not thinking about, oh, an algorithm is going to process this thing that I'm going to put out there. So you come across things that are very, very difficult for an algorithm to go through. For instance, it's legal documents, so their signatures. There's lots of organizations that scan in the last page where the signature is. And so you're dealing with a document that partially you can process and partially you can't, or you need a very different technique to process it. Then you have things like not knowing which entities are covered by a particular statement or what year the data is referring to. So there's very basic elements that to us seem like, well, if you're dealing with an algorithm, of course these need to be there. The documents are not being produced with that audience, that machine audience in mind. And so that's also a really big barrier to getting this project ready and implemented everywhere. I saw the question in the chat of how do we get it implemented everywhere so that we can really make use of this and really monitor on all these legislations. That's definitely what we're going for. But just developing the algorithm is not the only part that needs to happen. We need to have that adaptation from the legislative frameworks that are also preparing those who create these documents to know that an algorithm is going to process it. And we're starting to see the first bits of that happening in legislation that is being developed. So for instance, in the EU, all of the sustainable, they're working on the ESRS. You have to love all the acronyms. A new sustainability kind of taxonomy that they're working on that I believe it's now set for about 2024, 2025. Companies will need to be disclosing their sustainability data in a format. And there's the first talks of what kind of format should that be. And yes, that should be something that's machine readable, right? So these are all conversations that are happening right now. And that's also already, even though the project isn't in its kind of proof of concept stage, the learnings that we have from Project AIMS are feeding into those conversations as we speak. So yeah, there's already a lot of impact there, but yeah, a proof of concept is a little bit further away than we would have liked when we started this, of course.
And if I may jump in off the back of that, I think that goes to kind of some of the points I was raising in my opening comments, is that working through like who the audience of these particular statements are. So, you know, when, as Lorraine says, when this was first drafted, it was assumed that people would read these, not machines. And so, you know, that some of the strongest statements that we see being produced by companies that are actually actively engaging with this issue are very visual for that very reason. You know, they have images, they have infographics, all of these things that are incredibly difficult for a machine to then scan through and read. So there's, I think, a bit of a balance here between making sure that the statements are machine readable, so therefore we can unlock these statements at scale and provide that kind of accountability measure, as well as also recognizing that some people do actually still want to read these statements at the end of the day. Like, we would hate to kind of make these very static, very structured, and, you know, so that consumers can't access them, for example, as one other potential audience. But I do think there is an awful lot of, as I was mentioning, like opportunities. Like, this is a really exciting stage for this project. Like, we have gone through the last couple of years of learning these lessons of how you can even do things like identify the entity, scraping and finding their statement, making sure that it's in a format that you can actually pull the information out into a structured data set where you can actually read it. There is an awful lot of lessons learned here, and I put in the chat a little while ago one of the papers we put out last year that actually outlines some of these findings. Sorry, 2020, so a couple of years ago now. But I think there's a real opportunity here to build on those lessons learned from the project today, to really hone and refine this tool to make it as usable as possible. And I completely agree, Alison, from your points around looking at the UK and the Australian as a kind of a test case for this. I just say as well on the Australian and the UK, if they are the kind of intended clients for this particular tool, there are certain important differences that we see within those. In Australian, for example, the legislation, there is a requirement that they will have to report some of the findings back to Parliament. That doesn't exist under the UK legislation. So there is an opportunity there for actually building that out and supporting the government to do that, because we know from personal experience how resource intensive that whole process is. And then just the one final thing I wanted to kind of point out is, as well as this being an accountability measure, what's been really helpful throughout this whole process is also then creating lessons learned for our own advocacy to improve the legislation coming through. As I already mentioned for the EU space, obviously those lessons learned feeding into what's happening with mandatory human rights due diligence and also the taxonomy being developed. But also in with our own engagement with the UK and Australian governments, we can point to some of these issues, some of these things that are difficulties of finding these statements themselves, which can then be resolved through simple solutions such as having a centralised registry, which both the UK and Australia now have. So this project has lots of opportunities. It's very, very useful in terms of actually unlocking the data within those statements to hold businesses to account. But there's also a really important advocacy angle for this, where we can actually then work with governments to improve and continually strengthen the legislation that leads to the development of these statements in the first place. I'll stop there.
And some of these suggestions, such as to support machine readability, are codified in the report that we co-authored that's in the chat. But I'll just add on top that then we can think about the product or the business side. Maybe there's an interface to engage consumers of companies and while they're shopping, or investment analysts that are looking for ESG reporting in a visual way. It's the other side of making this really accessible and scalable.
Yeah, or workers. We have a project from another organization where they're feeding data about brand commitments on supply chain wages back to workers themselves. So they know, oh, I am supposed to be making at least minimum wage or living wage or something along those lines, right? So there's the audiences are expanded when you do allow machines to get involved. And I think that is something that, is something we cannot say enough, right? To the companies producing these statements, to the governments that are mandating this disclosure. There's many more audiences than that you had initially imagined.
Maybe if I just pitch in very quickly. In terms of the next phase of the project, I see that it is based on English language, right? Or should I say English statements? Now, obviously, English being the default language of the internet, so to speak. How do you envision? How do you think the internationalization of the project or the tool or the implementation could happen? Like, which ingredients are needed in order to make it truly international? I would assume using NLP methods and whatnot with other languages that are just coming up. For example, African languages. A lot of European languages are under-resourced. But is that the answer, or there's more?
So maybe if I can just say, I am not an NLP expert, so I'll leave that for someone else to maybe go into a little bit more. But what I can say is that you're hitting a very important point there, which is that at the end of the day, you train the algorithm to look for a specific word, and words have cultural contexts, right? So for instance, just to give you an example, we also do some work on more human rights more generally. The phrasing human rights is not something you'll find in disclosures, for instance, often coming from China or from Russia, where they might talk about other things like values or principles. So it's just a different word. Of course, words have meaning, as Adriana was very clearly showing. Modern slavery is a defined term, and that includes certain things. So there is also value to educate these disclosing entities on why they should be using certain phrases. But yeah, we can't forget that certain cultural contexts, you will use different words for the same thing. And so the algorithm needs to allow for that broad perspective. And that's even if they're both reporting in English, right? When we start to look at different languages, it gets even more complex. So language and how language is used is really important. And there, I think one of the things that we're also working on in this kind of advice to governments is codifying some of those kind of concepts, so that it doesn't really matter if you describe it a little bit different. If it has the same codification, the algorithm will be able to pick it up, and that can actually, that's another way in which technology can really help, kind of go across cultures and languages as well.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment. I agree that first of all, language is expressed very differently in different contexts. And so it's very hard to just deploy a simple translation algorithm on the text itself and have it, make sense in a different context. So I would talk about, I would be cognizant of the fact that language is expressed differently, and therefore the algorithms won't necessarily work well in different contexts. But B, we're also working in a space where there is unique features of the national context that informs the policy itself, as well as the corporate reporting. And in order to make sure that the tool that we're developing is accurate and robust and meaningful in that particular context, it's important that each time we train the algorithm, we have that data be reflective of the language that's used, the culture it's embedded in, the laws that are influencing the way that companies are reporting, and the culture that influences companies reporting themselves. So I think, again, it's sort of important to consider this particular use case in a very unique and specific context, and sort of iron out the details of how this can be created in a meaningful way in that context. But then to be able to figure out, okay, well, what does reproducing this look like in those different contexts, given how significantly those contextual elements are informing the way that the algorithms are working.
Adriana, we have a guest appearance. You want to say something? Want to come in,
Yeah.
pitch in?
I thought maybe just a quick comment on this, because I think this is a truly very important question, especially as we are seeing this wave or domino effect of legislations being passed. And I think we will love to be able to scale this solution, or at least the learnings of this solution in different contexts. But what we have done with the project aims, and what I think stands at the very foundation of this project, it is the diversity of expertise that came into this project. So even before moving anywhere near doing any machine learning, we have had experts such as Catherine and Lorraine creating the assumptions of each of the annotation that went into labeling the documents. So embedding that expertise, that knowledge from their experience of working with these documents and knowing what a good metric looks like and what a good interpretation of that metric is represented in documents, was truly maybe one of the most important steps, especially that we have predominantly looked so far at supervised machine learning. So the quality of that label data set was great. So I think if let's say that the law vigilance in France will like to follow the example of the UK and Australia and collect all the statements, and they make this available. What I think will be great will be to meet with experts that have expertise are looking at those statements, and together with them design the right annotation and the right process for the label data set. And then I think that the technological side, the machine learning side, this will be less of a problem, because the natural language processing models are truly growing exponentially and at an incredible speed. And I feel like there will be there will be a technical solution, as long as the data, which is the most important in any ML project, will be of high quality. And that will only be achieved if the right experts are at the gates of quality assurance of this data.
And maybe if I may, to add on to that, I think that's also an important thing to say about this project. We came from a completely manual assessment to looking at how we can bring in an algorithm, right? How we can bring in automation. We never intended, or for now don't foresee, automation completely taking over from humans. There would be an interaction between the two. So you have an algorithm that does that first processing, extracting the information, and then still this kind of crowdsourced approach where you can then check the work of the algorithm using confidence intervals to decide what needs checking by humans, and then them bringing out that nuance that a machine maybe cannot yet pick up on, but humans can. So, and then feeding that back, right? And hopefully also having that algorithm improve on that. So there is that vision of having the two working together rather than, AI taking over, which we kind of see in the movies most of the time.
Definitely. It's a human problem, and humans need to be part of the solution, from the development with teams like Alison's to the labeling, which needs to be so strong, to the deployment and the improvement, as you're saying.
And I just build on that and say that, yeah, even speeding up that initial part, right, of pulling out the relevant parts of the statement, and even pulling that together will speed up the process and reduce the resources needed on this. And what's so important within that is that it frees up the people doing this final kind of pulling of the assessment together to actually focus on the more meaningful questions rather than that more, you had a fantastic phrase for Adriana in your opening remarks, which I can't remember right now, but I would say the more manual parts of this, like the more labor-intensive, repetitive parts of the research, to actually then do a bit more of the deep diving. And just on the data point, like definitely, the labels and the AI is only ever going to be as good as the labels that go into it. Sorry, the AI is only going to be as good as the labels that go into it. So one thing we've hit, both also with training humans to do this as well as training machines, is when there's limited information within the statements of around certain metrics, it's very, very hard to show those as examples that are look for. So, for example, we still see that statements being produced under the UK and the Australian Modern Slavery Acts are pretty weak on remediation for workers, as well as also identifying positive cases of exploitation and how then they went on and remediated those. So that's one, just a bit of a plug to our business colleagues to make sure that they are being fully transparent about this, because it means we then can also train algorithms, train humans to actually engage with these statements and see what good practice looks like, and then share that as well within businesses. So much of our engagement is around people saying to us, we really want to be able to remediate properly, but we don't know how to do that. And so if we can't unlock that information and provide that, then it's a bit of a missed opportunity for giving businesses the answers that they're so desperately seeking at this point.
So I was thinking about that. So this project comes basically is conceptualized by a problem defined in civil society, and then it goes into research and academia, and then technical people and technicians and mathematicians and statisticians and whatnot. And then, and then at the end, we're also saying all of this we're doing because we want businesses to be accountable to something that, vis-a-vis the government. But could we also say that the businesses themselves could, post festum, let's say, pandemic, create a different type of either business models or value models on top of such cases as it is this one? So rather than just being accountable to us or to the civil society or back to the group of stakeholders, also look forward and say, oh, we can change our practices, and that makes a lot of sense. And actually, it also makes, revenue or value. Would that make sense?
We can hope for that. That would be ideal, but we've learned from so many cases beyond forced labor, environmental and others, that businesses' interests are often misaligned because their incentive structure, right? Publicly traded companies are incentivized to increase shareholder value. So that's where it's so great that we have tech tools and civil society to help. But of course, that would be an ideal situation if they recognize that they can compete, right? Like H&M has an environmental label on their clothes. I'm like, okay, I know this is true. They should work on the labor side as well, but that kind of indication can be really helpful.
Yeah, and I just echo that and also build upon it by saying that, there is a demand for this information. I think more and more people are actually looking for which businesses are ethical. Consumers are actually starting, just thinking about the garment sector. We released a report looking at the statements on those recently. There is a demand for ethical consumerism. So, you know, there is a demand for knowing that that the environment wasn't harmed in the clothes, in the making of my clothes, but also that no people were harmed in the making of my clothes. So I think there are so many potential audiences for this research. We know there's a policymaker, there's, you know, the business to business. W also mentioned other stakeholders. I'd say investors also want this information and being able to share that.
Yeah.
But there's also an element here where it provides an opportunity for businesses to learn from each other, to restructure some of their business models, to see what is actually happening and celebrating the success of those who are actually taking this seriously. I think there are examples within the statements that we've seen of real leaders in this space who are really grappling with human rights and really wanting to look at modern slavery risk within their direct operations supply chains and taking that very, very seriously. But sadly, I do agree with Yolanda, it's very few at this point in time, and the vast majority are probably either not engaging with it seriously and putting out kind of tokenistic statements, or are not reporting at all, even though they're legally required to. So yeah, I think there's a lot of scope there to actually share good business practice that's actually being disclosed in these statements and making that available to other business leaders out there.
And I think maybe also good to, sorry, if I very, very briefly may say, it's good to keep in mind as well that it differs a lot between sectors. So some sectors will really feel that this is an issue that is material to them, whereas others might not have that impression. Just to call out the financial sector, we did a study on them a few years ago. And there were so many statements that just said we have no reason to believe there's any forced labor in our supply chains or operations. And that was pretty much as deep as their statements on this topic went. So I think there's a big variety. And so by bringing in that automation piece, we can actually look at all of those and not just the leaders within that space.
And what I would also like to add here very briefly is that when the Modern Slavery Act in the UK or even Australia was passed, they didn't add a lot of teeth to this legislation because there was an assumption that the competitive nature of the company is going to make them race to the top. But research even recently in Australia showed that we can at best call it a race to the middle. So businesses do just enough, but not to look like they're not doing that they're doing less than their competitor, but they're not going the extra mile. Nevertheless, what or especially in Australia, the legislation give, it is an opportunity for voluntary statements to be published as well, because the legislation already requires big corporations with quite big turnovers to be subject to these legislations. But if a smaller company wants to showcase that they are taking the lead in this initiative, they can still publish statements, even if they're not required by law. So I think looking at some of those examples will give a really good indicator on some businesses that are truly leading by example. And I know we had a question in the chat from Jen from Slovenia in how can we have maybe companies there have similar requirements or similar behaviors in the absence of legislation. So I think here it is a lot of space still for advocacy to let not only businesses in different jurisdictions that do not have a legislative requirement to know that they can start even earlier than until legislation catches up and lead their industry by example. So until there will be legislation in Slovenia or in other countries where there is not, I think advocacy will be truly pushing and showcasing companies that they have an opportunity to be the leaders in this in this space.
If I may, I feel like I'm constantly adding to everyone. Feel free to shoot me down. But I would just say on that advocacy piece, maybe just a tip, as Catherine was already saying, an audience that is often considered by businesses investors. And you also see that because in the way that they've written their statement, when they talk about risk, what we find when it comes to remedying issues that they find, they talk about canceling contracts and pretty much turning around and walking away and not being associated with forced labor, which shows that they still consider it a risk to themselves rather than to the people that are being exploited. And I think that is a key finding there from all of this research, because it shows that they're actually writing these for their shareholders. They're writing these for investors to say, we are being responsible, we're protecting ourselves from risk. And so if we can get advocacy from the investor space on this issue, that is likely to have a lot of impact rather than just consumer advocacy or civil society coming by the doors and saying, you should do something about this.
I think that's a very interesting point, especially in terms of theories that are touching upon, capitalism 3.0 and where the third big change in the system that would basically unleash more of an ethical approach to, business and so on, especially multinationals. And, if multinationals are across different continents and countries, it means that they're across different governments as well. And it means that they have, they're touching upon customers in different languages. So you have this kind of extension of aims that could happen ideally if everything falls in line. So my final question would be, I think, how do you see the, what would be your blue sky project type of, final ending goal for aims? If you'd have like a, magic stick, like a Harry Potter type of wand, what would you wish for? Well, Catherine, yeah. If not Adriana, then Catherine.
I don't know if you wanted to jump in. Okay, so I'll go very quickly. So I think, as I mentioned, this is a really exciting time for this project because I think there is a lot of demand for this type of information. And Lorraine already mentioned the project we put out last year looking at the statements being produced by asset managers and investors. One of the key things that came out of our discussion with them post-release was that everyone is crying out for data on how to measure the S under ESG. Everyone wants that silver bullet of that answer. And I think the modern slavery act statements aren't that silver bullet, I will caveat that, but I will say that they provide some data that will help with answering that question. So I think being able to unlock the information in these statements and potentially also applying that to other reports coming out under managed human rights due diligence legislation around human rights risk is going to be really important and really useful for others going forward. So I'm thinking global. I'm thinking that we would have, this algorithm would be able to unlock anything around that S of the ESG. So that's my blue sky thinking.
Just to jump in, I would say that very similar ambitions. I mean, the goal is for this to be deployed as widely as possible because we know trafficking is a fairly global crime. And therefore, in order for us to have the most significant impact, we would need to get lots of countries on board and engaged in these types of conversations. The other thing I would mention is, as Adriana said, it's sort of the race to the middle. And I think that what we're dealing with here when it comes to supply chains is companies benefit from the economies of scale, from getting their primary goods from the same place that other companies are so that there can be this mass production type of industry. And that's what drives the price down. So I think we need to be thinking a lot about how can companies act together collectively to demand new models of labor specifically and new labor standards so that there can, we can sort of maintain this economies of scale practice that allows for international supply chains and allows for sustainable development around the world. But how can we make sure that there's no slavery in those supply chains? That's the goal. It's not, necessarily to create entirely new supply chains that government or that companies have to absorb the costs of themselves. It's really how can companies work together to improve the way that products are being made. So that's what I would say.
I mean, that's absolutely, of course, what the goal is, and yeah, completely echoing that. In terms of the project, the maybe just two big milestones, ambitious milestones that I'm really looking forward to. One is processing thousands of statements, knowing that we're getting into the 90% of statements being produced that we're able to assess. Like, God, that I'm looking forward to that day and letting companies know that that's happening and seeing what kind of impact that's going to have. And the second is really seeing this algorithm going into the space of another SDGs issue area and how that's being adapted. Those are the two major milestones that I just cannot wait for.
We'd love to see this implemented and scaled, including to other SDG areas, as well as the growing of this community. And we're pleased that to pass the torch and that it's in such good hands now with Adriana and her work at QUT and with Mila. Thank you so much for all of that, and with the people on this call and the growing community and the panelists.
I think from where I'm standing, I have the very long term, the blue sky, but also I'm also looking at the shorter term, just to keep that in mind as a crucial step. And I feel that it will be, while we're now going we're going to focus a lot on the research side and on the machine learning side and the data, so we can put out there very rigorous scientific based models. We would also like to think that we will be able to create an industry partnership with maybe one of the governments that already have such legislation, such as the in the UK, or maybe the border force in Australia. So having that real world implementation and deployment of this, I think, will be a key step in the midterm. And then hopefully with that, we can showcase with more confidence to the other stakeholders and the other legislative countries or jurisdictions how this actually works and how it's deployed, and we will have that feedback from our industry engagement. So I think that ideally we will be able to reach all these wonderful goals that were presented, but in the meantime to get this deployed with very solid research in between would be fantastic. And then of course the ultimate goal it is to have all this data analyzed at scale, have it structured, and then we can move and looking deeper into how this data connects with the other information that comes from supply chain of corporation, and truly have more evidence base that will help us save the victims that are already in the supply chains, or even looking forward to prevent others to fall into the same circle.
Awesome, thank you very much. I have 7 windows open. Everything is beeping, but I don't see any extra questions from the audience. So if there is one, we do have that 1 more minute for that. If somebody drops it in, from my side, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm extremely happy to be part of this from now on with IRCAI. Maybe. Okay, so there's a congratulation for you, Adriana. So with Adriana, we'll be working in the next couple of weeks, months on trying to understand how to help with the project. But we also got help from her. So the case study for this SDG is almost perfect in a way, and we can now go out and say, oh, look, there's scope for more projects like this one. Because they have value and they reflect society as it is at the moment, and solutions for that reflection. What we do have in mind is to kick off in May what we would call a global network of excellence in AI centers and for sustainable development goals. But that technically means, again, a very nice combo in between machine learning researchers and sustainable development researchers, or whichever way, activists or NGOs. So it's really a bit unprecedented what we have in mind, because it really shows the power of literally this. We would call in Europe we would call it consortium, project consortium, right? And this is something that we have not really been able to do in the past. It was all machine learning, with a couple of exceptions with maybe a charity here and there, or companies, but not in this sense as this one is, or we would like to. So that's our goal on our side, and it's been fantastic. Thank you very much. I hope to see you soon. there's no questions from the audience, so I think we're done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. If there's anyone from the press, we have a press conference in a couple of minutes after we refresh ourselves. Yeah.